I am the woman who waits for the dryer to buzz and the dinner to burn. My son Julian calls it retirement bliss, but my daughter-in-law Claire calls it having an extra hand. They think I am here because I have nowhere else to go, that the small Social Security check they see me deposit is the extent of my worth. They've forgotten that I am the architect of their comfort, the silent engine in the basement of their lives. They treat me like a servant because they believe I have nothing left to offer but my labor, unaware that the poverty they've assigned me is a mask I chose to wear. Please subscribe and like if you've ever felt invisible in your own family. Comment, I need to know what happened, because tonight, the silence in this house finally began to scream. How much of a mother's soul can be traded for a guest room? The steam from the dishwasher always hits my face with a damp, metallic heat that feels like a reprimand. It was 7:15 a.m., the time when the house begins to vibrate with the friction of people who have somewhere to be. I stood in the kitchen of the house my son Julian bought 3 years ago, a sprawling, glass-walled structure in the hills that felt more like a gallery than a home. I was loading the breakfast plates, the ones with the hand-painted rim that Claire insisted were too delicate for the machine, yet here I was, scrubbing them because she simply didn't have the bandwidth this morning. "Mom, did you see my navy blazer? The one from the dry cleaners?" Julian's voice drifted down the hallway, sharp and impatient. He didn't come into the kitchen. He spoke to the space where he expected me to be. "It's in the hall closet, Julian. I pressed the lining yesterday," I said, my voice steady, though my thumbs ached from the cold water. He appeared in the doorway, checking his watch. He's 38 now, a man who carries the weight of a law firm on his shoulders, yet he still looks at me as if I am a piece of furniture he inherited from his childhood. He grabbed a piece of toast from the rack, not looking at me. "Thanks. Listen, Claire has that gallery opening tonight. Leo needs to be picked up from soccer at 5, and he has that project on the solar system due. Can you make sure he actually glues the planets this time?" "I have my book club at 4, Julian," I said softly, wiping my hands on a tea towel. It was a small lie. I didn't have a book club. I had a meeting with a man named Elias, who managed things Julian couldn't fathom. But book club was a currency they understood. A harmless, elderly hobby. Julian paused, a slight frown creasing his forehead. It wasn't an expression of concern. It was the look of a man whose lawn service had failed to show up. "Can't you skip it? Claire's really stressed about this opening. It's a big deal for her career." "I've skipped the last 3, Julian." "Right. Well, family first, Mom. That's what you always taught me, isn't it?" He gave me a quick performative kiss on the cheek, the kind that barely grazes the skin, and was gone before I could respond. Family first. It's a beautiful sentiment when it's a circle. When it's a one-way street, it's just a debt that never gets paid. Claire came down 10 minutes later, a whirlwind of expensive perfume and clicking heels. She didn't acknowledge the breakfast I'd set out. She went straight for the espresso machine, her eyes glued to her phone. "Margot," she said, using my first name, as she always did when she wanted to establish a professional distance. "The guest bathroom has a bit of a streak on the mirror. When you have a moment? I'm having the girls over for coffee tomorrow morning." I looked at her. Really looked at her. She was beautiful in a brittle, curated way. To her, I was the lucky mother-in-law who had been rescued from a lonely apartment after my husband passed. She saw my sensible shoes and my faded sweaters and saw a vacuum. "I'll get to it, Claire," I said. "Great. Oh, and the grocery list is on the counter. We're out of that almond flour Leo likes. I know it's at the market across town, but it really makes a difference in his muffins." She reached into her purse and pulled out a $20 bill, sliding it across the marble island like a tip. "Keep the change for your whatever it is you do." I didn't touch the money. I watched it sit there, a small green insult against the white stone. "I'm not a servant, Claire." She laughed, a short musical sound that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, Margot, don't be so sensitive. We're a team. We provide the house, you provide the heart. It's a fair trade, isn't it? Especially since, well, you know how tight things would be for you otherwise." She took her coffee and left, the scent of her perfume lingering like an uninvited guest. The psychological weight of being helped is a heavy one. They believed they were my benefactors. When I sold my house 5 years ago to help Julian launch his firm, they saw it as a final act of a dying star. They assumed the money was gone, eaten up by his overhead, his office lease, his ambition. I let them believe it. I let them believe I was down to my last few thousand because I wanted to see who they were when they didn't have to be good to me for an inheritance. I walked to the hallway and picked up my old leather-bound ledger from the small table by the door. It was scuffed and unremarkable. Inside, there were no recipes or phone numbers. I opened it to the last page. The numbers there didn't match the woman scrubbing mirrors. They didn't match the woman being told to drive across town for almond flour. I heard the back door click shut as the cleaning service they hired for the heavy stuff arrived. They didn't even realize I did 3/4 of the work before the professionals got here, just to keep the peace. I went to my room, the one over the garage, and sat on the edge of the bed. My phone vibrated. A text from Elias. "The acquisition is complete. The hangar fees are settled in Denver. When do you want to announce the shift?" I looked at the chipped mug on my nightstand, a gift from Leo 2 years ago. It was the only thing in this room that felt like mine. I thought about the mirror in the guest bathroom and the $20 on the counter. I typed back, "Not yet. I want to see if they remember my birthday tomorrow. Just one more day." I stood up and went to the guest bathroom. I picked up the glass cleaner. As I wiped the streak away, I saw my own reflection. Gray hair, tired eyes, a woman who looked like she had nothing left. I smiled at the ghost in the glass. The most dangerous person in the world is the one who has been told they are nothing, because they have the luxury of watching everyone else reveal exactly who they are. As I finished the mirror, I heard Claire shouting from the driveway. She'd forgotten her yoga mat. She didn't come back inside. She honked the horn, 3 short, demanding bursts. I didn't move. I stood in the silence of their beautiful, hollow house and waited to see how long she would honk before she realized I wasn't coming out. The drive to the specialty market took 40 minutes in the midday traffic. I drove my 10-year-old sedan, a car Julian often suggested I park around the corner when they had guests because the aesthetic didn't quite fit the driveway. In the back seat, my grandson, Leo, was hunched over his tablet, the blue light reflecting in his eyes. He's 10, an age where the world should be opening up, but he seems to be closing in on himself, mimicking his father's hurried cadence and his mother's sharp dismissiveness. "Leo, honey, look at the trees," I said, gesturing to the park we were passing. "The maples are finally turning." "I'm in the middle of a level, Grandma," he muttered, not looking up. "And Mom says we're late for my snack. Did you get the specific almond flour, the one in the purple bag?" "I'm on my way to get it now, Leo." "Good. The other stuff tastes like sand. Claire says you sometimes forget the details." Claire says. It's a phrase that has become a constant hum in this family. Claire says I'm getting forgetful. Claire says I need a routine to stay sharp. Claire says I should be grateful for the structure they provide. I parked the car and walked into the store. My knees were stiff. a reminder of the hours I'd spent kneeling on their hardwood floors yesterday, searching for a missing Lego piece that Leo had insisted was essential. I found the purple bag of flour. It cost $14. I looked at the $20 bill Claire had slid across the counter earlier. I used my own credit card, a black, heavy piece of metal that the cashier didn't even blink at, though its limit could have bought the entire grocery store. I kept Claire's 20 in my pocket. It felt like a weight, a physical manifestation of how little they thought I possessed. When we got back, the house was a hive of activity. Julian was in his home office, his voice booming through the door about a merger. Claire was in the living room, supervising a florist who was arranging white hydrangeas for her coffee morning tomorrow. "Oh, you're back," Claire said, barely glancing at the grocery bag. "Margot, could you take those into the kitchen? And Leo needs his protein shake before his tutor arrives. I've laid out his vitamins on the counter." I walked into the kitchen and began the process of being the heart of the home. I made the shake, I wiped the counter, I organized the pantry. As I worked, I heard Claire talking to the florist. "It's a bit much, I know," Claire laughed softly. "But with the gallery opening tonight and the girls coming over tomorrow, I just can't have the house looking lived in. My mother-in-law helps, of course, but you know how it is with that generation. They have a different standard of clean." I stopped, my hand hovering over a jar of honey. A different standard of clean. I am the one who hand scrubs the baseboards because the professionals they hire skip the corners. I am the one who polishes the silver Julian's father left behind, the silver Claire uses to impress her friends while telling them I'm comfortably settled in their care. I waited until the florist left before I stepped into the living room. "Claire, I was wondering if we were doing anything special for dinner tonight," I asked. She didn't look up from her iPad. "I told you, Margot, Julian and I have the gallery opening. You and Leo can just have some of that leftover pasta. Or make him a grilled cheese? He loves your grilled cheese." "I know, tomorrow is my birthday." The silence that followed was heavy. Claire finally looked up, her expression a mix of genuine surprise and immediate calculation of how this would affect her schedule. "Oh, Margot, of course. I had it in my calendar for next week. I'm so sorry. Well, look, we'll do a big brunch on Sunday, okay? The opening is just so vital for the firm's connections, and tomorrow morning is the coffee. Julian is exhausted, and I'm just buried." "Sunday would be lovely," I said, though the words felt like ash. "I just thought maybe a small cake tomorrow evening? For Leo?" "We'll see, honey. Let's just get through the next 24 hours first. Oh, and don't forget the laundry in the basement. I need my silk wrap for tonight, and it's still in the delicate cycle." She offered a tight, practiced smile and walked away. Psychologically, there is a point where a person becomes a ghost before they actually die. You see it in the way people talk over you, the way they schedule your life without asking, and the way they forget the date you entered the world. They don't do it out of malice, usually. They do it because they've stopped seeing you as a person with needs and started seeing you as a utility. I went to the basement. The air was cool and smelled of detergent. I sat on a stool by the dryer and pulled out my phone. I had 3 missed calls from a number in London. I called back. "Margot." The voice on the other end was hushed, respectful. "The board is asking for your signature on the divestment papers. We're moving the capital into the holding company as discussed. Also, the pilot mentioned you're due for a maintenance flight. He suggested Teterboro or perhaps a quick trip to the coast." "Not yet, Arthur," I said to the lawyer on the phone, who happened to share my late husband's name. I'm currently occupied with a silk wrap and some almond flour. Ma'am? I'll sign the papers digitally tonight, Arthur. Tell the crew to stay on standby. I might need a change of scenery sooner than I thought. I hung up and pulled Claire's silk wrap from the dryer. It was expensive, fragile, and required a specific touch to iron. As I held it, I felt a sudden, sharp pang of loneliness. I didn't want a private plane. I didn't want a board of directors. I wanted my son to remember that I liked lemon cake. I wanted my daughter-in-law to ask me how my knees were feeling. I carried the wrap upstairs. As I passed Julian's office, the door was slightly ajar. "I'm telling you, the cash flow is tight," Julian was saying into his headset. "If we don't land this account, we might have to look at downsizing the house. Or, I don't know, maybe Mom has some of Dad's life insurance left that she's sitting on. She's always been frugal. I should ask her for a loan to cover the property taxes this quarter." I stood in the hallway, the silk wrap draped over my arm like a white flag. He wasn't even going to ask. He was going to manage me. I walked back to my room over the garage. I didn't iron the wrap. I laid it across the chair and sat in the dark, watching the sun dip behind the hills. They think I have nothing. They think I am the debt they are paying off with a guest room and a shared kitchen. I looked at the calendar on my phone. Tomorrow I turn 65, the age of official retirement. I wonder if they'll even notice when the utility finally stops running. The sun rose on my 65th birthday with the same indifferent gray light that usually filters through the garage top windows. I waited for a few minutes, staring at the ceiling, listening for the sound of a door opening or the soft padding of Leo's feet coming to tell me, "Happy birthday." Silence. Then, the sharp, rhythmic thud, thud, thud of Julian's treadmill. He was awake, but he was running in place, miles away from the thought of me. I went downstairs. The kitchen was already a staging ground. Claire had left a stack of linen napkins on the island with a sticky note. "Margot, please iron these with high steam. The girls will be here at 10. Also, the catering crates are arriving at 9. Can you help them set up in the sunroom? You're a star." I looked at the note. I wasn't a star. I was a sun that had been cooling for decades, and they were simply basking in the last of my heat without realizing it was almost gone. I began the ironing. The steam rose, dampening my hair and clinging to my skin. At 8:30, Julian walked in, wiping sweat from his neck with a towel. He headed straight for the fridge, grabbed a Gatorade, and chugged half of it before noticing me. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice thick with post-exercise endorphins. "Did the coffee shipment come in? Claire's worried about the roast." "I haven't seen it, Julian," I said, my hand steady on the iron. "Did you sleep well?" "Too much on my mind. Cases, mostly." He leaned against the counter, watching me. There was a shift in his posture, a sudden forced softness that usually preceded a request. "Listen, I wanted to talk to you about something, real quick." I set the iron upright. "Yes?" "The firm is hitting a bit of a growth spurt. Good things, but it's created a temporary liquidity gap. And the property taxes on this place, they're a beast this year." He laughed, a nervous, boyish sound that used to work on me. "I was thinking about that policy Dad left you, the one you've been keeping for a rainy day. I was wondering if we could move some of that into a joint account, just to bridge the gap for a few months. It would basically be an investment in Leo's inheritance, you know? Keeping the house stable." I looked at my son. He didn't know that the policy he was referring to was a drop of water in the ocean of what I actually held. He thought he was asking for my last life vest. I'll have to look into the paperwork, Julian, I said quietly. I'm not sure what the withdrawal penalties are. Right. Just think about it. It would take a huge weight off my shoulders. Anyway, I got a shower. Big meeting at 10. He started to walk away, then paused in the doorway. He looked at me for a second, his brow furrowed as if he was trying to solve a puzzle. My heart skipped. Was he going to remember? Oh, he said. The gardener is coming at 11. Make sure he doesn't blow leaves into the pool, okay? Claire hates that. The door closed. The puzzle remained unsolved. By 10 o'clock, the house was filled with the high-pitched "darling" and "it's been too long" of Claire's social circle. I was in the sunroom, wearing my best, humble cardigan, arranging tiny lemon tarts on a silver platter. "Margot, could we get more hot water for the Earl Grey?" Claire called out from the center of a circle of women in beige cashmere. I brought the kettle out. As I poured, a woman named Tiffany, a woman who had once asked me if I needed her old coat for the winter, leaned toward Claire. "She's just so precious, Claire," Tiffany whispered, loud enough for me to hear. "It's so rare to find someone who actually cares for the home these days. You're lucky she had nowhere else to go. It's like having a boutique housekeeper who actually loves the kids." Claire gave a modest shrug, sipping her tea. "It works for everyone. We provide the security, she provides the hands. It keeps her active. You know how people her age can just fade away if they don't have a purpose." I finished pouring the water. My hand didn't shake. I felt a strange, cold clarity. They had assigned me a purpose because they couldn't imagine I had my own. To them, I was a rescued animal, grateful for the bowl of kibble and the warm corner. I retreated to the kitchen. Leo was there, rummaging through a drawer. "Grandma, where's my charger? The fast one?" "I think it's in your backpack, Leo," I said. I leaned down so I was at eye level with him. "Leo, do you know what day it is?" He stopped, his face scrunched in thought. "Friday?" "It is Friday. But is there anything else?" Soccer practice at 4? He looked genuinely confused. Then his eyes lit up. "Wait, is it the day the new game drops?" "No, honey, it's not the day the game drops." I reached out to touch his hair, but he flinched away, already distracted by the charger he'd spotted on the counter. "Got it, thanks, Grandma. Can you make me those rolls for lunch? The ones with the cheese inside?" He ran out before I could answer. I sat down at the small wooden table in the corner of the kitchen, the one they'd moved out of the dining room because it cluttered the flow. I pulled out my phone. It was 11:15 a.m. I opened my email. There was a notification from a luxury concierge service. "Your itinerary for tomorrow is confirmed, Mrs. Sterling. The car will arrive at 400 for the private terminal. Your guest list remains empty. Would you like to add any passengers?" I looked at the guest list field. It was a blinking cursor, a void waiting to be filled. I thought about Julian's liquidity gap. I thought about Claire's boutique housekeeper comment. I thought about the lemon cake I wouldn't be eating tonight. I typed, "No passengers, just me." Psychologically, the hardest part of leaving isn't the departure itself. It's the realization that you've already been gone for a long time in their hearts. I had stayed because I thought I was the glue holding them together. But as I watched Claire laugh with her friends through the glass door, I realized I wasn't the glue. I was the floor. And they were walking all over me without ever looking down. The girls stayed until 2. When they left, the house was a wreck of crumpled napkins, half-eaten tarts, and lipstick-stained cups. Claire came into the kitchen, rubbing her temples. "Ugh, I'm exhausted," she sighed, sinking into a chair. "Margot, be a dear and clear the sunroom. I need to lay down for an hour before the gallery opening. And Julian said he talked to you about that financial thing. We really need that sorted by Monday." I stood up. I picked up a tray. "I'll take care of it, Claire." "You're the best," she murmured, already closing her eyes. "Oh, and if a delivery comes, a big box from Bergdorf's, just put it in my closet. It's my dress for the gala next month." I walked into the sunroom. The scent of expensive tea and shallow conversation still lingered. I began to pick up the cups. I picked up Tiffany's cup, the one she'd used while calling me precious. I held it over the trash can for a long second. Then, I let it go. The sound of the fine porcelain shattering against the plastic bin was the first happy birthday I'd heard all day. And it sounded beautiful. The house smelled of expensive cedar and the cold, lingering scent of the white hydrangeas. By 6 p.m., Julian and Claire were in a state of high-velocity preparation for the gallery opening. I watched from the kitchen doorway as Julian struggled with his cufflinks, his face flushed with the kind of stress that only people who have never known true hardship can manifest. "Mom, can you get this?" he asked, thrusting his wrist toward me. "Claire's still doing her hair, and we're already 20 minutes behind." I stepped forward and manipulated the small silver toggle. My fingers were steady, a stark contrast to his twitching pulse. "There you go, Julian." "Thanks, you're a lifesaver," he said, already turning toward the mirror. "Oh, and Leo's dinner? Just make it quick. He's got a lot of homework and I don't want him staying up late. We'll probably be back by midnight. Don't wait up." He didn't look at me. Not once. He looked at his reflection, then at his watch. He was a man who lived in the future and the past, never in the present moment where his mother was standing, 65 years old today, waiting for a single word of recognition. Claire floated down the stairs a few minutes later. She looked exquisite, in a gown that must have cost more than the sedan I drove. She smelled of jasmine and success. "We're off," she chirped, grabbing her clutch from the island. "Margot, I left the Bergdorf box on the stairs. If you could just take it up to my closet and perhaps steam the wrinkles out of the dress inside, I want to wear it for the firm's dinner next week. It would be a huge help." "It's my birthday, Claire," I said. The words were quiet, but they felt like a stone dropped into a still pond. The ripples moved through the room, hitting them both. Julian paused with his hand on the door handle. Claire blinked, her smile faltering for a fraction of a second. "Right!" "Oh my God, Margot, I am so sorry," Claire said, her voice dripping with that performative sweetness that tastes like saccharin. "This day has just been a whirlwind. Julian, honey, did you know it was today?" Julian turned, looking genuinely caught off guard. I thought it was tomorrow. Mom, I'm so sorry. I've been so buried in that merger." He stepped toward me, reaching into his back pocket. He pulled out his wallet and fished out a $100 bill. "Look, take this. Order yourself something nice for dinner. Get the fancy sushi Leo likes, okay? We'll do the brunch on Sunday, I promise. A big celebration." He pressed the money into my hand. It was crisp and cold. "I don't want sushi, Julian," I said softly. "Well, whatever you want then," he said, his tone shifting back to impatience. He could feel the clock ticking. "We really have to go. The partners are expecting us. Happy birthday, Mom. Truly." The door clicked shut behind them. The silence that followed was heavy, a physical presence in the cavernous foyer. I stood there, holding the $100, the price of their guilt, the Emotional rent they paid to keep me in my place. I went to the stairs and picked up the Bergdorf box. It was heavy. I carried it up to Claire's dressing room, a place of mirrors and soft lighting. I opened the box. Inside was a dress of midnight blue silk, shimmering with hand-sewn beads. It was a masterpiece of design. I looked at the invoice tucked into the tissue paper. $8,000. $8,000 for a dress, while Julian asked me to loan him my late husband's life insurance money to cover the property taxes. Psychologically, it is a fascinating thing to watch people rationalize their own selfishness. They didn't think they were being cruel. They thought they were being efficient. They had categorized me as a resource, a renewable, low-maintenance asset that didn't require investment, only occasional maintenance in the form of a $100 bill or a promised brunch. I didn't steam the dress. I laid it over the velvet bench and walked out. In the kitchen, Leo was sitting at the island, his tablet propped up against a cereal box. "Grandma, I'm hungry," he said without looking up. "I know, Leo. I'm making your grilled cheese." I stood at the stove, the butter sizzling in the pan. This was my birthday dinner, a 10-year-old's favorite sandwich, eaten in a kitchen that wasn't mine, in a life that felt like a suit of clothes 2 sizes too small. "Grandma?" Leo said suddenly. "Yes, honey?" "Why are you so quiet today?" I turned to look at him. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the boy he used to be, the one who used to bring me dandelions and ask me to tell him stories about the olden days. "I'm just thinking about tomorrow, Leo," I said. "What's tomorrow?" "A new year, for me." "Oh." He went back to his game. The flicker was gone, replaced by the digital glow. After Leo went to bed, I didn't go to my room. I went to the basement. I found the old trunk I'd brought with me when I moved in. They had tucked it behind the furnace, covered in a thin layer of dust. I opened it and pulled out a small, locked metal box. I took it to the laundry table and opened it with a key I kept on a ribbon around my neck. Inside were the things they didn't know about. My husband's real legacy wasn't the life insurance policy. It was the patents he'd held, the early investments in logistics firms, and the trust he'd built for me that sat in an offshore account, untouched for 5 years. I had lived on my Social Security because I wanted to be mom. I wanted to be grandma. I wanted to see if they loved the woman who had nothing, or if they only respected the woman who had everything. Now I had my answer. I pulled out my laptop and logged into my banking portal. The balance was a long string of numbers that made Julian's liquidity gap look like a child's piggy bank. I sent an email to the concierge service. "Regarding the 0400 car, please ensure the driver has a discreet entrance. I will be leaving via the garage. No luggage will be required. I have everything I need at the destination." I felt a strange sense of mourning, not for the money, but for the illusion. I had spent 5 years trying to buy their love with my labor, hoping that if I scrubbed enough floors and made enough muffins, I would become indispensable to their hearts. But all I had become was indispensable to their convenience. I went back upstairs and did something I hadn't done in years. I went into the sunroom and poured myself a glass of Julian's most expensive scotch. It tasted of peat and fire. I sat in the dark, watching the headlights of cars passing by on the road below. Each one represented a life, a destination, a choice. At 11:30 p.m., my phone buzzed. A text from Julian. "Opening is great. Might be later than we thought. Hope you had a good dinner. Don't forget to lock the back door." I didn't reply. I set the glass down on the marble coaster. They treated me like a servant because they believed I had nothing. They believed my worth was tied to my bank balance, and since they saw a 0, they treated me like one. Tomorrow, the plane lands. Tomorrow, the nothing becomes a mountain they'll have to climb if they ever want to see me again. I walked to the hallway and looked at the family photograph hanging by the door. We were all smiling. It was a beautiful lie. I took the photograph off the wall, turned it face down on the console table, and went to my room to wait for the dawn. The 4 a.m. air was thin and bitingly cold, the kind of chill that sinks into your bones and stays there. I didn't pack a suitcase. Packing a suitcase implies you intend to return to the life you're leaving, or that you have things worth carrying. I had nothing in that room over the garage but a few sensible sweaters and the ghosts of my own sacrifices. I left them all behind. I walked through the darkened kitchen one last time. I saw the $100 bill Julian had given me sitting on the marble island, pinned beneath a salt shaker. I didn't touch it. I also saw the Bergdorf box I'd carried up for Claire. She had left it on the dressing room floor, a discarded shell of an $8,000 dream. I stepped out into the driveway. A black sedan was idling at the curb, its headlights dimmed to glowing embers. The driver, a man in a crisp suit who had been in my husband's employ for a decade, stepped out and opened the door without a word. He didn't ask why I was leaving in the middle of the night. He didn't ask where my luggage was. "Good morning, Mrs. Sterling," he said softly. "It's good to see you again." "It's good to be seen, David," I replied. As we pulled away, I looked back at the house. It was a beautiful glass and steel monument to Julian's ambition, glowing like a lantern in the woods. To the world, it was a home. To me, it had become a place where I was the only person who knew where the extra light bulbs were kept, yet the only one who lived in the dark. The drive to the private terminal took 20 minutes. At the main airport, the world was a chaos of lines and noise, but here, there was only silence and the smell of jet fuel and expensive leather. "Your pilot is ready for you, ma'am," the concierge said, bowing slightly. "We've stocked the cabin with the lemon tea you prefer and the morning papers." I walked onto the tarmac. My private plane, the Sterling Star, sat under the hangar lights. It was a sleek silver bird that my husband had bought as a toy, but which had become a sanctuary for me in the years after he died, until I'd grounded it to try and be a normal grandmother. I climbed the stairs. The interior was warm, smelling of cedar and stability. I sat in the wide, cream-colored leather seat and watched the sun begin to bleed over the horizon. My phone vibrated in my pocket. It was 6:45 a.m. The house in the hills would be waking up. The first text was from Claire. "Margot, where are you? I don't see the coffee started, and the catering crates from yesterday are still in the sunroom. I have a meeting at 8. Please call me." 3 minutes later, a text from Julian. "Mom, did you take my navy blazer to the cleaners? I can't find it in the hall closet. Also, Leo says he can't find his iPad. Did you move it?" I didn't answer. I watched the messages appear on the screen like tiny digital demands. They weren't checking to see if I was okay. They weren't wondering why the woman who had lived with them for 5 years was suddenly gone. They were wondering why the engine of their convenience had stopped humming. Psychologically, there is a specific type of panic that sets in when a person who has been treated as an object suddenly asserts their humanity. It's not the panic of loss. It's the panic of inconvenience. They weren't missing me. They were missing the labor I provided. The plane began to taxi. I felt the surge of the engines, that powerful rhythmic vibration that signals a break from the earth. As we lifted off, the houses below turned into toys, then into dots, then disappeared entirely into the clouds. Around 9 a.m., my phone rang. It was Julian. I let it ring for 3 beats before I answered. "Mom, where the hell are you?" His voice was tight, bordering on a shout. In the background, I could hear Leo complaining about breakfast and Claire's heels clicking rapidly on the hard wood. "We've been looking everywhere. Your car is gone, but your clothes are still here. Did you go to the store or something?" "I'm on a trip, Julian," I said. My voice was calm, a sharp contrast to the turbulence in his house. "A trip? What are you talking about? We have the brunch on Sunday, and I told you I need to talk to you about the tax situation. You can't just leave without saying anything. Claire is losing her mind because the house is a mess." "The house isn't a mess, Julian. It's just exactly as you and Claire left it. I simply stopped fixing it for you." There was a long silence on the other end. I could almost hear his brain trying to process a version of me that used the word no or stop. "Look, I don't know what this is," Julian said, his tone shifting into that condescending lawyer voice he used when he wanted to win an argument. "If this is about your birthday, I told you, we're doing the brunch. We're sorry, okay? But you're being a bit dramatic, don't you think? Just come home and we'll figure out the tax loan today." "I won't be coming home today, Julian. Or tomorrow." "Then where are you? I'll come get you." "I'm at 30,000 feet, Julian. I'm going to my house." "Your house? You sold your house to help me with the firm. You don't have a house." "I sold a house, Julian. I never told you I sold the estate in the Hamptons or the apartment in London." The silence this time was absolute. It was the sound of a man realizing the person he had been treating like a pauper was, in fact, the one holding all the keys. What are you talking about?" he whispered. "I'll be in touch when I've had some sleep," I said. "And Julian? The navy blazer is at the cleaners on 4th Street. You'll have to go pick it up yourself. They don't deliver." I hung up. I looked out the window at the endless blue. For 5 years, I had shrunk myself to fit into the corners of their lives. I had played the role of the nothing mother because I wanted to see if they would love the woman behind the wealth. I had found my answer in the way they looked past me at every dinner, and the way they assumed my only value was my ability to steam a silk dress. The flight attendant approached me. "Would you like your breakfast now, Mrs. Sterling?" "Yes, please," I said. "And could you bring me a glass of the vintage champagne? It's my birthday." "Of course, ma'am. Happy birthday." She said it with more sincerity than my son had in 5 years. I opened my ledger. I didn't look at the bank balances this time. I looked at a photo of my husband, Arthur, tucked into the back cover. He was smiling, standing on the deck of a boat we'd owned in a different life. You were right, Arthur, I thought. They have to lose the floor before they learn how to stand on their own. I felt a pang of guilt, a sharp, cold needle in my chest. Was I being cruel? Or was I finally being kind to myself? The plane tilted, banking toward the coast. Below us, the ocean glittered like a field of diamonds, cold, hard, and impossibly beautiful. I realized then that I wasn't just flying away from a house. I was flying away from the version of myself that had allowed them to treat me like a servant. And as the bubbles in the champagne rose to the surface, I wondered if Julian would find his blazer, or if he would finally realize that the most expensive thing in his life was the mother he'd just lost. The Hamptons estate, which I had kept under the management of a silent holding company for 5 years, breathed with a life of its own. When the car pulled through the iron gates, the gravel crunching beneath the tires felt like a symphony after the muffled silence of my room over Julian's garage. Evelyn, the housekeeper who had been with our family since Julian was in diapers, was waiting on the porch. She didn't look surprised to see me without luggage. She didn't look surprised to see me at all. "The linens are aired, Mrs. Sterling," she said, taking my coat. "And I've stocked the pantry with the high mountain oolong you like. I took the liberty of clearing the dust covers from the sunroom." "Thank you, Evelyn. It's good to be home." "It's a quiet house, ma'am," she noted, her eyes lingering on mine for a second too long. "Perhaps too quiet for some, but I suspect it's exactly what you need." I walked into the foyer. The ceilings were 20 feet high, the walls adorned with art that Julian only dreamed of owning, original sketches and oils that my husband, Arthur, had collected not as investments, but as loves. For 5 years, I had lived in a house where I had to ask permission to hang a single photograph of my own parents. Here, the very air seemed to remember my name. I sat in the library, the late morning sun streaming through the leaded glass windows. My phone, which I had placed on the mahogany desk, began to vibrate. It hadn't stopped for hours. It was Claire this time. I answered. "Margot, is this some kind of joke?" Claire's voice was high, brittle, and lacked the melodic veneer she usually wore. "Julian told me what you said, about the houses, about the money. We're sitting here in the kitchen, and Leo is crying because he doesn't understand why you left, and the house it's a disaster, Margot. There are flowers dying in the sunroom, and I have a lunch meeting in an hour." "The flowers can be thrown away, Claire," I said. "And Leo is crying because he's 10, and he's realized that the person who makes his world turn isn't there to hand him his tablet. He'll survive." "How could you do this?" she hissed. "How could you let us believe you were struggling? How could you sit there and watch Julian stress about the firm, watch us take you in out of the goodness of our hearts, while you were sitting on a fortune? It's sociopathic, Margot." I leaned back in the chair, feeling the cool leather against my neck. "The goodness of your hearts, Claire? You took me in because I was free labor. You took me in because I was a live-in nanny, a housekeeper, and a buffer for your marriage that didn't cost you a dime. If I had been the woman you thought I was, a widow with nothing, I would still be there, scrubbing your baseboards on my birthday." "That's not fair. We gave you a family. We gave you Leo." "You gave me the leftovers of your lives," I replied. "You gave me the tasks you didn't want to do and the rooms you didn't want to sit in. And the moment Julian thought I had a few dollars left in a life insurance policy, he moved in like a predator to loan it from me. He didn't ask how I was. He asked for my signature." "We're family, Margot. Family helps each other." "Family also sees each other, Claire. You haven't seen me in 5 years. You've seen a utility." I hung up before she could respond. The silence of the library rushed back in, but it wasn't peaceful. It was heavy. Psychologically, the betrayal I felt wasn't about the work I'd done. I had been happy to do it, initially. I had wanted to be useful. The pain came from the realization that my value in their eyes was tethered entirely to my perceived poverty. Because they thought I had nothing, they felt entitled to everything I had left: my time, my energy, my dignity. They didn't respect the sacrifice because they didn't think I had any other choice. I walked to the window. In the distance, I could see the Atlantic, a gray-blue expanse that looked as restless as I felt. Why had I hidden it? I asked myself that question as I watched the waves. When Arthur died, the wealth felt like a burden. It was a reminder of everything I had lost. I wanted to be just Mom. I wanted to see if Julian, who had always been a bit too enamored with status, would love me if I was just a woman with a batch of cookies and a listening ear. I had conducted an experiment on my own son, and the results had devastated me. A notification popped up on my phone, an alert from the security system at the Hill House. Someone was in my room over the garage. I opened the app and looked at the feed from the small, discreet camera I'd installed a year ago after I noticed some of my jewelry, minor pieces but sentimental, had gone missing. On the screen, I saw Julian. He wasn't crying. He wasn't looking for a note. He was going through my drawers. He was tossing my sweaters onto the floor, his face twisted in a focused, ugly kind of greed. He was looking for the ledger. He was looking for bank statements. He was looking for the nothing he still hoped was a lie. He found the small, locked metal box I'd intentionally left under the bed. He sat on the floor, trying to pry it open with a letter opener he'd brought from his office. I watched him, my breath hitching in my throat. This was the boy I had tucked in. This was the man I had given my savings to 5 years ago. He finally forced the box open. He reached inside and pulled out the only thing I'd left for him. It wasn't a check. It wasn't a deed. It was a photograph of him as a 5-year-old, holding a drawing of a house. On the back, in his messy childhood scrawl, it said, "For Mommy, I will build you a castle so you never have to work again." On the camera feed, I saw Julian go still. He stared at the photo for a long time. Then, he didn't weep. He didn't look ashamed. He threw the photo back into the box and kicked it across the room. "Where is it?" he yelled, his voice muffled by the tablet's speakers. "Where did she hide the paperwork?" I closed the app. My hands were shaking. The exclusion I had felt for 5 years was finally complete. I had been excluded from his heart long before I left the house. I was just the last one to realize it. I picked up the house phone and dialed Evelyn in the kitchen. "Evelyn, please call the groundskeeper. I want the gates locked. No one enters without my express permission, especially not my son." "Of course, ma'am," Evelyn said. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the pity in it. That was the hardest part. Even the staff knew I was being discarded before I did. I sat back in the silence. I had my castle now, but as I looked around at the priceless art and the perfect empty rooms, I realized that a castle is just another word for a fortress. And fortresses are built to keep people out. The curiosity that had kept me going, the hope that they would change, was dead. Now, a new question took its place, one that chilled me to the bone. How far would Julian go to get the nothing he felt he was owed? The first thing I did in my castle was sleep. I slept for 12 hours, a deep, heavy slumber that felt less like rest and more like a recovery from a long illness. When I woke, the sun was high over the Atlantic, and for a moment, I forgot where I was. I reached for the edge of the bed, expecting the rough, utilitarian sheets of the guest room over the garage. Instead, my hand brushed 500 thread-count Egyptian cotton. I sat up, the silence of the estate wrapping around me like a shroud. In Julian's house, silence was a luxury I had to earn by finishing the dishes or putting Leo to bed. Here, it was the baseline. Elias, my primary financial advisor, arrived at noon. He was a man of few words and impeccable suits, the kind of person who exists in the shadows of the very wealthy to ensure the light never flickers. He sat across from me in the sunroom, a folder of thick, cream-colored paper between us. "The transition is almost complete, Margot," he said, his voice a low, soothing baritone. "The holding companies have been restructured. Your anonymity is secure for the moment, though your son's recent inquiries at the bank in the city have flagged our system." "He went to the bank?" I asked, my heart giving a small, painful thud. "Twice yesterday." "He was quite insistent that there must be an error. He claimed your Social Security deposits were inconsistent with the estate records he believed existed. He was asking for access to his father's dormant accounts." Elias looked at me over his glasses. "The bank manager followed the protocols. He was told that without a power of attorney, no information could be released. Your son became agitated." "Agitated," I repeated. It was a polite word for the Julian I had seen on the security camera, kicking a memory across a dusty room. I've also received the preliminary audit of the firm's finances, Elias continued. Julian's liquidity gap is larger than he led you to believe. He's leveraged the Hill House to its limit. If he doesn't secure a massive influx of capital by the end of the quarter, he won't just be downsizing. He'll be insolvent. I looked out at the manicured lawn. I had given him $200,000 5 years ago. I thought it was a foundation. Apparently, it was just a down payment on a lifestyle he couldn't afford. He's been playing a high-stakes game, Margot, Elias said softly. And he's been using your presence as a safety net. Psychologically, as long as you were there, scrubbing the floors and looking poor, he could tell himself that he was the successful one. He was the benefactor. It's a common delusion among children of wealth. They need to see their parents as diminished to feel enlarged. I just wanted to be his mother, Elias. You were his mother. He chose to see a servant. There's a difference. Elias left, leaving me with a sense of cold, analytical clarity. My son wasn't just selfish. He was desperate. And desperate people don't seek forgiveness. They seek targets. My phone rang as I was finishing a bowl of soup Evelyn had prepared. I didn't recognize the number, but I had a feeling. Hello? Grandma? It was Leo. His voice was small, shaky, and lacked the usual digital bravado. Leo? Hi, honey. Is everything okay? Mom and Dad are fighting again, he whispered. I could hear the muffled sound of shouting in the background, the sharp, percussive tone of Claire's anger and Julian's low, defensive growl. Mom says we might have to move, and Dad says it's your fault because you're hiding things. Grandma, why did you leave? I don't like the grilled cheese Mom made. It's burnt. The guilt hit me then, a physical blow to the stomach. I had left a 10-year-old in the middle of a war zone. I had been so focused on my own emotional survival that I'd forgotten he was the only innocent party in that hollow house. I'm sorry about the sandwich, Leo, I said, my voice thick. I had to go away for a little while to take care of some business. I'm not hiding anything to hurt you, I promise. Then come back. Dad says if you come back and sign the papers, everything will be fine. He says we can even go to Disney World. My blood went cold. Julian was using Leo. He was coaching a child to negotiate for him, dangling a vacation like a carrot to get me back into that garage room so he could raid my accounts. Leo, can you put your dad on the phone? There was a scuffle, a brief silence, and then Julian's voice, suddenly smooth, suddenly reasonable. Mom? I'm so glad you answered. Leo was just saying how much he misses you. Look, we're all a bit stressed, and I know things got heated, but we really need to sit down and talk, like adults. I've reached out to a mediator. We can meet on neutral ground. Just tell me where you are. You're using your son to bait me, Julian, I said. Do you have any idea how much damage you're doing to him? I'm trying to save his future, Julian snapped, the mask slipping for a second. His school, this house, the life we've built, it's all on the line. And you're sitting on a mountain of cash that Dad meant for us. You're being selfish, Mom. You're playing some twisted game of who loves me more, and it's pathetic. The mountain of cash you're so interested in isn't yours, Julian. It never was. It was a trust designed to protect me and eventually to protect Leo when he's old enough to understand its value. You've proven you don't. We'll see about that, Julian said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. I've been talking to some people. If you're truly forgetful, like Claire says, or if you're being manipulated by your advisors, there are legal avenues to protect you from yourself. We're your family, Margot. We have a right to ensure you're being properly cared for." The implication was clear. He was going to try to have me declared incompetent. He was going to use the very servant persona I'd adopted, the quiet, compliant, slightly fading grandmother, as evidence that I was no longer fit to manage my own affairs. He didn't want my love. He didn't even want my presence. He wanted my power of attorney. "I'll see you in court then, Julian," I said. I hung up before the sob could break through. I sat there, shaking, in my beautiful, empty sunroom. Psychologically, the distance between us was now infinite. He had moved from neglect to active hostility. He wasn't just excluding me from the family. He was trying to erase my personhood to get to my assets. I looked at the phone. I thought about Leo sitting in that kitchen, eating burnt cheese, watching his parents turn into monsters. I stood up and walked to the library. I picked up the ledger and opened it to a hidden compartment in the back. Inside was a small, encrypted USB drive. Julian thought he knew everything about his father's business. He thought he knew why we had moved 5 years ago. He thought he knew where the money came from. He was wrong. There was a reason I had lived like a servant, and it wasn't just to test his love. It was to hide. I plugged the drive into my laptop. The screen glowed with a list of names and dates that had nothing to do with law firms or real estate. If Julian wanted to play legal avenues, he was about to find out that some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. The curiosity hook wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the secret Arthur had left me, the one that had kept me in that garage for 5 years, terrified of being found. And now, Julian was the one holding the flashlight. The file on the USB drive was titled simply, "The Ledger of Omissions." It was a digital ghost, a collection of documents my husband Arthur had compiled in the final months of his life. As I sat in the library of the Hamptons estate, the blue light of the laptop screen felt like a cold interrogation. Arthur hadn't been a criminal, but he had been a fixer. He was the man large corporations called when a mistake, a chemical leak, a faulty part, an accounting error, threatened to become a catastrophe. He had been paid handsomely to make things go away, but he had kept the receipts. He had stayed quiet for years, and when he died, he told me that our safety lay in our invisibility. "If they think we're just another retired couple with a modest pension, Margot, they'll leave us alone. But if they see the scale of the pensions I've collected, they'll wonder what else I left you." For 5 years, I had honored that silence. I had lived in a room over a garage, scrubbing dishes and folding laundry, because the safest place for a woman with a dangerous inheritance is in the shadow of someone else's mundane life. Julian had provided the perfect cover. His ego was so large it created its own weather system, and I had been content to live in the rain. But now, Julian was trying to poke a hole in the clouds. A buzz at the front gate intercom broke my concentration. I looked at the security monitor. It wasn't a process server. It was Claire's white SUV. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the deny button. But then I saw her through the camera. She wasn't the poised, brittle woman from the gallery opening. Her hair was pulled back in a messy knot, and she was leaning against the car door, her shoulders slumped. She looked defeated. "Let her in, Evelyn," I said into the intercom. 10 minutes later, Claire was sitting in my sunroom. She refused tea. She refused to sit on the silk-upholstered chairs, choosing instead to stand by the window, looking out at the sprawling lawn she hadn't known I owned. "Julian is out of his mind, Margot," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She didn't look at me. "He's been at the office for 36 hours. He's calling every contact he has, trying to find a judge who will sign an emergency guardianship order. He's convinced himself that you've been brainwashed by Elias, or that you're having a mental break." "And what do you think, Claire?" I asked. She finally turned to face me. The envy in her eyes was so thick I could almost taste it. "I think you've been playing us. I think you sat in our house and watched us struggle, watched me stress over every penny for Leo's school while you were sitting on all of this." She gestured vaguely at the room, the art, the ocean. "How could you let us treat you like that if you had this?" "I didn't let you treat me like that, Claire. You chose to treat me like that. I simply didn't stop you." "It's the same thing," she snapped, a flicker of her old fire returning. "You were testing us, like some cruel goddess in a fairy tale. Well, congratulations, Margot. We failed. Are you happy now? Does it feel good to see Julian spiraling?" Psychologically, it was a masterclass in displacement. She couldn't face the fact that their own behavior was the cause of the rift, so she had to frame my silence as a trap. To Claire, my wealth wasn't a resource. It was a weapon I had used against them by withholding it. Her dependency on the lifestyle Julian had built was so absolute that the threat of losing it had stripped away her last shred of dignity. "I'm not happy, Claire," I said. "I'm tired. I spent 5 years trying to be a mother and a grandmother to a family that only saw me as a convenience. You didn't even remember my 65th birthday." Claire flinched. For a second, a genuine look of shame crossed her face, but it was quickly replaced by a hard, calculating look. "Julian is going to lose everything, Margot. The firm, the house, his reputation. And if he loses those things, Leo loses everything too. Is that what you want? To win an argument but lose your grandson's future?" "Leo's future is secure," I said. "I've already set up a trust for him that neither of you can touch. He'll have his education, his health care, and a start in life. But he won't have a life built on his father's delusions of grandeur." Claire stepped closer, her voice dropping. "Julian doesn't care about the trust for Leo. He cares about the now. He's desperate. And when Julian gets desperate, he gets reckless. He started looking into Arthur's old files. He found some names, Margot, some companies. He thinks he can use those names to leverage the people who worked with your husband. He thinks there's more money out there, waiting to be claimed." A cold dread settled in my stomach. Julian was doing exactly what Arthur had feared. He was digging in the graveyard, unaware that some of the bodies weren't dead. They were just sleeping. "He doesn't know what he's doing, Claire. Tell him to stop, immediately." "I can't tell him anything," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "He won't listen to me. He thinks I'm part of the problem because I let you get away. He's actually blamed me for not managing you better." The imbalance of their marriage was laid bare in that moment. Claire wasn't a partner. She was a lieutenant who had failed her general. Her dependency on Julian's success had made her a prisoner of his ego. "Why are you here, Claire? Truly." She looked down at her hands. "Because I'm scared. I'm scared of what he'll do if he doesn't get what he wants. And I'm scared that if I don't help him, he'll leave me when the money runs out anyway." "So you're here to beg for him? Or for yourself?" "For Leo," she lied. We both knew it was a lie. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the iron gates. Beyond them lay the world Arthur had tried to keep us from. Julian was trying to tear down the walls, thinking he was breaking into a treasure vault, when he was actually breaking out of a fortress. "Tell Julian this," I said, not turning around. "If he files those papers for guardianship, I will release the full audit of his firm's finances to the Board of Ethics. I will show them exactly how he's been borrowing from client escrow accounts to pay his mortgage." I heard Claire gasp. She hadn't known. Julian had been keeping his own secrets, even from her. "And tell him," I continued, my voice cold and final, "that if he mentions a single name from his father's old files to anyone, he won't have to worry about a liquidity gap. He'll have to worry about the people who spent 20 years paying for his father's silence. And they aren't as patient as I am." The silence in the sunroom was absolute. I could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, a steady, rhythmic reminder that time was running out for the life they had known. "I'll tell him," Claire whispered. She turned and left, her heels clicking softly on the marble. I watched her sous vide pull away through the gates. I went back to the library and looked at the USB drive. The curiosity hook wasn't about whether Julian would stop. It was about whether he could. Desperation has a momentum all its own, and Julian had been running for so long he didn't know how to hit the brakes. I opened the file on the omissions again. There was one name at the top of the list, a name that made even my blood run cold. It was a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate that Arthur had fixed a decade ago. Julian had that name. I knew he did. I'd seen it on his desk once, scribbled on a yellow legal pad months ago. I've thought it was just a client. Now I realized it was a fuse. And Julian was holding a match. The silence of a 30-room estate is different from the silence of a room over a garage. In the garage, the silence was thin, interrupted by the hum of the heater and the distant sound of the family I thought I belonged to. Here, the silence is heavy, architectural, and filled with the ticking of clocks that Arthur bought because he liked the sound of time being measured. It had been 48 hours since Claire's visit. I spent the time moving through the house like a curator of my own life, touching the spines of books and the edges of silver frames. I felt a strange, hollow power. I had the money. I had the secrets. But when I looked in the mirror, I still saw the woman who had spent the last 5 years worrying about whether she'd bought the right brand of almond flour. My phone rang at 7 p.m. I didn't recognize the number, but my fingers trembled as I answered it. "Mom, it's me." Julian's voice was remarkably calm. It wasn't the voice of the man I'd seen kicking a box on a security feed. It was his courtroom voice, measured, resonant, and utterly devoid of warmth. "I've been thinking about what Claire said, about your threats regarding the firm's audit." "They aren't threats, Julian. They are consequences," I said, sitting at Arthur's mahogany desk. "You think you're protecting yourself, but you're just proving my point," he continued, ignoring my correction. "A sane woman wouldn't try to destroy her only son's career. A loving grandmother wouldn't try to bankrupt the house where her grandson sleeps. Your behavior is erratic, Margot. It's vengeful. Any judge in the state will see this as a mental health crisis triggered by the anniversary of Dad's death." "Is that what you're going with? That I'm crazy because I'm finally standing up to you?" "I'm going with the truth," he said, and I could almost see the cold smile on his face. "The truth is that you've been living a double life. You've been hiding assets, lying to the government about your income, and now you're using those assets to coerce your family. That's not a legal defense, Mom. That's a symptom." Psychologically, it was a brilliant move. He wasn't defending his own actions. He was pathologizing mine. By framing my rebellion as an illness, he could invalidate every truth I spoke. He was reestablishing the power imbalance by making me the patient and himself the protector. "I've already filed the preliminary petition, Margot," he said. "The hearing is in 10 days. Until then, I suggest you stay where you are. Don't make things worse by trying to move the money. My lawyers have already requested a temporary freeze on any accounts associated with Dad's holding companies. You have no idea what those accounts are, Julian. I know enough, he snapped, the calm cracking for just a second. I know Dad wasn't just a fixer for corporations. I know about the omissions files. I found the backup server in his old office in the city. You thought you were the only one with the keys? You forgot I was the one who helped him set up his IT infrastructure 20 years ago. My heart stopped. Arthur hadn't been a tech-savvy man. He'd trusted Julian with the tubes and wires of his digital life. I had assumed the USB drive was the only copy. Julian had a mirror. Julian, listen to me very carefully, I said, my voice barely a whisper. If you open those files, if you look at the data in that server, you aren't just looking at money. You're looking at a list of people who would rather burn this entire state to the ground than have their names in a public record. You are putting Leo in danger. Do you understand me? The only danger Leo is in is losing his home because his grandmother is hoarding a fortune out of spite, Julian said. I'm done talking, Mom. See you in court. He hung up. I sat in the dark library, the air feeling suddenly too thin. Julian was an arrogant man, but he wasn't a stupid one. However, his desperation had blinded him to the nature of the world Arthur had operated in. He saw leverage. He didn't see targets. I walked to the window and saw a pair of headlights at the gate. It wasn't Claire. It wasn't Julian. It was a black SUV, idling just beyond the iron bars. It didn't buzz the intercom. It just sat there. I called the security hut. Mark, who is at the gate? I don't know, ma'am, the guard replied. They haven't identified themselves. I went out to ask them to move, but they didn't roll down the window. They've been there for 20 minutes. A cold, familiar dread settled over me. This was the something Arthur had warned me about. The moment the silence was broken, the world would come looking for the pieces. I went back to the ledger. I needed to know which specific file Julian had accessed. If he had mirror-imaged the server, he might have already tripped a dead man's switch that Arthur had told me about. A notification sent to a third party if the data was ever accessed from an unauthorized IP address. I opened my laptop and checked the server logs. My breath hitched. An access request had been made 4 hours ago, from Julian's office. But there was a second log, an outgoing ping to an encrypted address in Geneva. Arthur's security system hadn't just alerted me. It had alerted the omission. The imbalance had shifted again. It wasn't about me and Julian anymore. It was about our family and the people in those files. Julian thought he was holding a winning hand in a game of poker, but he had actually just walked into a room full of professional assassins with a neon sign over his head. I heard the front door open. Evelyn walked in, her face pale. Mrs. Sterling? There's a man at the door. He says he doesn't need an invitation. He says he's an old friend of Mr. Sterling. Did he give a name, Evelyn? He just gave me this, she said, handing me a small, embossed card. There was no name, just a logo, a stylized hawk circled by a serpent. I knew that logo. It belonged to the Vance Group. They were the multi-billion-dollar conglomerate at the top of the omissions list, the ones Arthur had fixed a decade ago. I looked at the card, then at the black SUV on the monitor. Julian hadn't just opened the box. He'd rang the dinner bell. "Show him into the library, Evelyn," I said, my voice steady despite the fact that my knees felt like they were made of water. "And tell the groundskeeper to take the night off. I don't want anyone else getting caught in the crossfire." Psychologically, I was back in the role I'd played for 40 years, the silent partner, the one who cleans up the messes. Only this time, the mess was my own son, and the price of fixing it might be more than even I could afford. The curiosity was no longer about whether Julian would love me. It was about whether I could save him from the very nothing he'd accused me of having. Because compared to the people walking through my front door, Julian's law firm, his house, and his reputation were exactly that. Nothing. The door to the library creaked open. A man in a gray suit, perfectly tailored and utterly anonymous, stepped inside. "Margot," he said, his voice as smooth as polished stone. "You've been very quiet lately. We were beginning to think you'd forgotten our arrangement. But your son, he has a very loud way of reminding us." He smiled, and I realized that the quiet realization of the ending was still a long way off. We were just getting to the part where the blood starts to spill. The man in the gray suit, whom I now knew as Mr. Vane, didn't move from the doorway of my library. He didn't look like a threat. He looked like an accountant for the apocalypse. He looked at the omissions file on my laptop screen and then back at me. "Your son is currently at the Teterboro private terminal, Margot," Vane said, his voice devoid of any inflection. "He believes he is meeting with our board of directors to finalize the transfer of your assets under the emergency guardianship he filed this afternoon. He brought a digital copy of your husband's files as his entry fee." "And the board?" I asked, leaning back. "The board is waiting. But as you know, the board doesn't like to be blackmailed by amateurs." I stood up. I didn't feel the ache in my knees anymore. The 5 years of playing the fading mother had been a long, slow exercise in restraint, but the restraint was over. "Is the Sterling Star fueled?" "Waiting on the tarmac, ma'am." "Then let's not keep my son waiting. It's time he sees what nothing actually looks like." Psychologically, the move from a garage room servant to a woman of global influence is not a change of soul, but a change of costume. I put on a coat of charcoal cashmere, one I hadn't worn since Arthur's funeral. I left the Hamptons house and boarded the helicopter that had landed on my lawn 5 minutes prior. As we flew toward the private airfield, I looked down at the sprawling lights of the coast. For 5 years, I had shrunk myself. I had let Claire talk over me and let Julian treat me like a piece of faulty machinery. I had done it because I wanted to believe that the son I raised was stronger than the greed I feared. I had given him every opportunity to be a good man to a woman who had nothing to offer him but her love. And every time, he had chosen the mirror over the mother. We landed at the terminal 10 minutes before Julian's scheduled meeting. I stayed in the shadows of the hangar as I watched his car pull up. Julian stepped out of his sedan looking like the man he always wanted to be. Back straight, chin high, clutching a leather briefcase that contained the secrets he thought would buy him a kingdom. Claire was with him, wearing the midnight blue Bergdorf dress I had refused to steam. She looked terrified, her eyes darting around the cold, industrial space of the hangar. "Julian, this feels wrong," I heard Claire whisper as they walked toward the center of the floor. "Why are we meeting here? Why couldn't they come to the office?" "Because this is how the real players move, Claire," Julian snapped. "They don't do meetings in glass boxes. They do them where they can leave the country in 10 minutes if things go sideways. Once I sign these papers and show them I have the server mirror, the firm's debt is gone. Mom can live in a nice facility in the city, and we never have to worry about almond flour again. I watched him, my son. He was standing in a circle of light, unaware that the darkness surrounding him was filled with the people he was trying to outsmart. Then, the sound of a heavy engine began to whine outside. The hangar doors began to roll back, revealing the Sterling Star as it taxied into the bay. The silver fuselage gleamed under the floodlights. Julian's eyes widened. He looked at the tail number, the stylized hawk and serpent he'd seen in his father's notes. "Here they are," Julian whispered, straightening his tie. "Get ready, Claire." The stairs of the plane lowered with a mechanical hiss. Julian stepped forward, his hand out, ready to greet the board. I stepped out of the shadows and walked toward the stairs. I didn't look at the plane. I looked at Julian. "Mom?" Julian's hand dropped. "What are you doing here? How did you get past the gates?" "The gates were never yours to lock, Julian," I said. A man stepped off the plane, not a board member, but Elias, my advisor. He handed me a single sheet of paper. "The guardianship petition was reviewed by the circuit judge an hour ago, Julian," I said, my voice echoing in the vast hangar. "It turns out that when a woman has a recorded history of managing offshore trusts worth 9 figures, it's very hard to prove she's forgetful. The judge didn't just deny your petition, he flagged it for fraudulent filing." Julian turned pale. "I have the files, Mom. I have the omissions. If you don't give me the power of attorney, I'll release them. I'll ruin Dad's name. I'll ruin everyone on that list." "Go ahead," I said, stepping closer. "Open the briefcase, Julian." He fumbled with the latches and pulled out the USB drive. He plugged it into his tablet, his breath coming in short, jagged gasps. "I'm doing it. I'm sending the first file to the press right now." He hit a key. Nothing happened. The screen turned red, then black. A single line of text appeared. "Access denied. Source traced." "You forgot one thing, Julian," I said softly. "You told me you set up your father's IT infrastructure 20 years ago, but you forgot who paid for your degree. You forgot that your father never trusted anyone with his secrets, not even his son. The mirror you found was a honeypot. It was a digital trap set for anyone who tried to steal from the family. The moment you opened it, you didn't get leverage. You got a confession of industrial espionage." Julian looked at the tablet, then at the Sterling Star, then at me. The realization finally hit him, not as a thunderclap, but as a slow, freezing tide. He wasn't the benefactor. He wasn't the player. He was the child who had tried to steal from the person who had been protecting him all along. "What now?" Claire whispered, her voice breaking. She looked at the $8,000 dress that was now a costume for a life that was over. "Now," I said, "Julian goes back to the Hill House. He will find that the liquidity gap has been filled by a private buyer. Me. I've bought your mortgage, Julian. I've bought the firm's debt. I've bought every penny of your life." You're bailing me out?" Julian asked, a flicker of hope, the same ugly, parasitic hope returning to his eyes. "No," I said. "I'm your landlord. And as of tomorrow, the rent is due. And since you're insolvent, you'll be vacating the premises. You can take your navy blazer and your iPad, but the house, the silver, and the lifestyle? Those belong to the servant now." I turned my back on them and walked toward the stairs of the plane. "Mom, you can't do this!" Julian screamed. "I'm your son! We're family!" I paused on the top step and looked back over my shoulder. The wind from the tarmac whipped my hair across my face. Families sees each other, Julian. You haven't seen me in 5 years. You've only seen what you could take from me. Tomorrow I'm sending a car for Leo. He'll be staying with me at the estate while you and Claire find bandwidth to rebuild your lives. I entered the cabin and the door began to close. Through the closing gap, I saw Julian sink to his knees on the concrete floor of the hangar. He looked small. He looked like the boy who had once promised me a castle, now realizing he was the one who had burned it down. The plane began to taxi. As we lifted off, I sat in the cream-colored leather seat and looked at the empty place beside me, where Arthur should have been. "It's done, Arthur," I whispered. I pulled out my phone and deleted the number for the house in the hills. Then, I looked at the flight attendant. "Ma'am?" she asked. "Where to?" "London," I said. "I have a meeting with the board, and after that, I think I'd like to learn how to bake a lemon cake. From scratch. For myself." I looked out the window as we pierced the cloud layer. The world below was gone. The dishes, the laundry, the mirrors, and the son who didn't know his mother's name. The plane had landed, the debt was settled, and for the first time in 65 years, I was finally the only one in the room.